All right, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to this session. This is going to be Optimizing Visual Studio Code for PowerShell 2024 edition, and I'm happy you're all able to make it. On the bottom there is a QR code for the session content. I don't think I got my pull request taken quite yet, so it's not quite there yet, but that will be where the slides are. It will primarily be for the main thing you want is all the links and such will be there. So there won't really be any links on the screen, but there will be clickable images for when you need to get to these items. There's nothing like really specific to grab. So, and this won't be the last time you see it, so don't be too worried about grabbing it right now. Again, always big thanks, huge thanks to the sponsors who sponsored this event. This event doesn't happen without them, as you know. We say it over and over again because it really doesn't. They really help bring all the additional resources to really make this just a truly spectacular event and one of the favorite things that I get to do every year. Another huge thank you to my company, Allied Digital, which sponsored my travels, so I could come across the pond to be here. Allied Digital is a multinational MSP. We manage all kinds of infrastructure. As you see, we got whole kinds of verticals and horizontals and slantways and sideways. We do a lot of stuff. But yeah, if you're in the market for an MSP and you want some people who to make sure that on our back end we use PowerShell extensively, we really believe in automation, and that helps us allow our customers to be more productive, allow us to be more productive, and make sure that we're delivering the best product that we do possible. Come check us out. Again, I'm Justin Grote. I'm a data center solutions architect with Allied, 4 times Microsoft MVP, hopefully, fingers crossed, 5 here in about a month. I work on a lot of stuff. I help contribute to the PowerShell VS Code extension, which I'll be showing off today. I contribute to the Pester extension for VS Code. I got a bunch of different modules like Power HTML, Module Fast, secret management modules, Posh Nmap, IP network, press, etc. Whole bunch of stuff there. So check out my GitHub, check out my Twitter, and I'm also always on the PowerShell Discord. Always happy to chat. So today I'm going to be showing off a lot of what's new in the last year, mostly around either Visual Studio Code or in the PowerShell extension itself, and ways to sort of help optimize for your time when you're working inside Visual Studio Code to kind of have the best productivity you can while working with PowerShell. This is part of an ongoing series that we've basically started doing. So back even in 2022, kind of did 2 versions of it there. 2023 did it then. And this year also, one you may not have seen is that for PowerShell Summit, Andy and I, who is the main lead maintainer on the VS Code extension, we did a presentation that was a history of the PowerShell extension, like where it came from, the steps that it went through and how it came to be, as well as a lot of information for what's new and some changes there. So that's a good presentation to check out. Otherwise, you may have seen these other ones. I'm not going to cover a lot of the content that's in those, but the main summary is install the PowerShell extension pack, which I maintain. That is a collection of extensions. That's basically a curation that I do for what I feel are really good additional VS Code extensions that really help for your productivity with PowerShell. Things like Indent Rainbow and a lot of the good GitHub tools and like Tyler's inline values extension, all those kind of things. Check that out. And a lot of those are previous extensions are demoed in those other videos. Always be sure to check out all the PowerShell specific VS Code settings under that heading. There's all kinds of stuff there's always new features being added pretty much every year. And there's all kinds of settings for code formatting and customization and really being able to get your environment the way you want it. And with PowerShell, one of the best things, as we talk about all the time, is using some sort of source control. And GitHub and the GitHub PR and GitHub Actions extensions get invested in so much every year, and those help out so much. Even Git Graph extension also, which is one of my favorites. Those can just help you work with source control, be able to check in documents, check out much more comfortably, and have kind of a whole editor experience beyond just the Git command line, and really be able to help see what's going on and making sure that you're able to maintain your code properly, have contributors, etc. It is a really good and wonderful tool. And that's my time to demo, which I hope is pretty good. So we are going to jump right in. So this is my Visual Studio Code and kind of set up the way that I like it. And we're just here in this. One thing you may notice that's a little different, obviously my bar is on the right instead of the left. This is a debate that people have all the time. My argument for this is simply that when I do this, my code doesn't move back and forth, back and forth, back and forth when I open and close it. And there's also, if you don't know, you can do Control-Alt-B and you have an additional bar over here. So you have two bars that you can put things. So I personally like to have kind of like my information, my timeline, everything that I access over here, and then things that are like running things like my testing, my GitHub Actions, and like the outline for my thing over here. Like that's just how I like to work. You can arrange it however you like, but just be aware that if you didn't know, there is this additional sidebar. So one of the things that's new this year is you may have noticed I don't have icons down the side over here, but I rather have icons here on the top. So you now have a way to set, this is what's called the activity bar. And it's just a setting in VS Code for the activity bar that allows you to basically choose, when you used to be able to choose left or right, you can now also choose top or bottom. And I really like this because it gets everything nice and compact, and I'm able to have a lot more of these icons and gives me more screen real estate to work on the stuff that I actually want to work on. So that just one of the very small things, but very, very useful that has been added to provide you a really good view. Another thing that was added, if you go into the VS Code repo, which I'm going to skip here for a minute, but if you go in and you look at all the issues, the most upvoted issue ever in the history of VS Code was the ability to detach editor windows. So if you have not seen this or you haven't seen the updates, you can now just simply grab any item you have, drag it out, and now you can tear it off as a separate window. So this is so cool. Yeah. Years in the making. They had to move heaven and earth with Electron to make this work, because it was like one of the fundamental assumptions of what VS Code was based on just couldn't do this. And so they always knew it was a thing. Huge thanks to the team that worked on this, extremely talented people. And so now you can do this. So it's not as obvious in this presentation setting, but where this matters is multiple monitors. If you have multiple monitors, it used to be you had to open a bunch of different VS Code sessions or whatever. Now you can do these things and tear them off. But you also don't just have to tear off editors. If you have a terminal, you can take a terminal down here, and if you want that to be in just like another tab, most people already know this. This is nice. So if you want like a vertical terminal, it doesn't just have to be down there. You can move it wherever you want. But one of the things you can do now is you can tear off terminals. And you have the ability to just have a terminal in its own separate window wherever. So if you're using like Windows Terminal, et cetera, or if you're on a platform that doesn't have Windows Terminal, there's a lot of great features in Windows Terminal, but if your main thing is just to have a terminal that's like tear-offable and separate, you kind of don't even need it anymore. I'd say my usage of Windows Terminal probably went down like 50 to 80% because I can now do this when I just want to have my little separate terminal that I'm doing something in. So that's a really great additional feature that is not quite as like shown as the editor windows, but it's pretty good. And in the same way, all these things can be combined and re-pushed back together and moved over here, stacked up and down. You can do whatever. You can move this stuff all around real nice. So that's a really great additional feature that is new this year. One thing, up front, I forgot to mention, I'm going to show a lot of things here. One thing I'm not going to talk about is GitHub Copilot and all the Copilot and generative tools, because there's plenty of talk on those. They're great tools. They're fantastic for PowerShell. I use them every day, but there's lots of great presentations already that talk about those. So definitely go check those out. And also, it's not free. And pretty much I try to make sure anything that I show in this presentation is free. It's everything that you can just do today and doesn't require anything. All right. Another thing is that when you have new extensions, you may have noticed every once in a while when you go to your extension list, that every once in a while when you have a new extension or it needs to be updated, that instead of just reloading your entire VS Code, you can now just reload individual extensions. So what this can do is this can just restart the extension host, and we'll see if it'll let me do it here. So rather than reload, you now see restart extensions. And when you do this, it'll restart your extension host, but without reloading all of VS Code. So that's really nice when you have like updates or things come out or you need to like troubleshoot an issue. There is a known issue currently with the PowerShell extension where you will get, if I go down here, you'll get duplicate PowerShell extension terminals if you do this. We're hoping to get that fixed pretty soon. But also if there's a checkbox that you can do to just hide the PowerShell extension. Andy's a big advocate that this whole like PowerShell ISE style of having the terminal and the editor, in the same thing. He not so secretly hates it and constantly recommends people to turn it off. So it's an option if you want. I still prefer this style, but that's one way to avoid it because it won't do this. But that should get fixed pretty soon. One thing that we have here is with Visual Studio Code, one of the greatest things that's always great is the IntelliSense, for any kind of items that you're doing. And I might actually have to fully bounce my code because of that extension issue here. So we always have IntelliSense, and that's one of the nicest things that we have in VS Code. So what a lot of people don't know is there's not a lot of magic in how VS Code or how the PowerShell extension does IntelliSense. It pretty much just calls the same completer engine as when you're at the PowerShell command line. Like when you hit Control Space at the command line or you hit Tab, it's more or less what's happening here when you're doing a completion is the same thing that happens when you do that. Like when you do Control Space here in this detail is the same information you'll get like when you hit Control Space at the command line. So why that's important is that when improvements are made to PowerShell to its autocomplete engine, VS Code just gets it for free. We don't have to do anything to enable those kind of things. So one thing that's been really great is this is just PowerShell 7.4. So absolutely many thanks to Martin GC94. This guy has been making all of these pull requests to add all kinds of IntelliSense fixes, type inference fixes, all kinds of different things. You can go through and read all these. And this is just 7.4. He did this in 7.3. He did it in 7.2. You have all of these really great completion. So like you have completion for like using namespace. You have a completion for dollar using. All the stuff that just didn't used to work now just works and is lit up thanks to this guy. It's amazing work. So one thing that I showed last time, but some people missed or aren't aware of, is my favorite type of auto completion. So everybody here know what splatting is? Okay, pretty good. If you don't know what splatting is, it's a way to have, rather than have to have all your parameters at the end over here, to be able to assign it to a hash table, and then rather than dollar the variable, be able to do at the variable and save yourself some room. And it's really nice because it has a lot of benefits over doing positional parameters because you don't have to use like backticks to show them off. You can make parameters like conditional and like build this hash table dynamically before you pass it to the command. Lots of great reasons to use splatting. But I've heard even very recently from speakers, one annoying thing about splatting is that you quote unquote lose IntelliSense. Like, you build a hash table and you can't. Well, if you didn't know this, if you first have your line where you have a command and you splat it, if you go back to the variable where you define it, it can infer, it can infer is that big enough, by the way? Sorry, let me make that a little bit bigger. It can infer the parameters based on the command down here. So if you have an invoke rest method, you do Control Space there. There's follow link, HTTP version, all of those. If I do another one, like if I change this to get child item, now it infers for get child item parameters. So if you use splatting and that kind of thing and you didn't know this is a thing, it's awesome. It's super great. And there's all kinds of stuff like that, like sprinkled everywhere, like especially with like typing. So like, for instance, if you have a hash table, I haven't run this code. So it's not known to the extension yet that this is a hash table and that item is an object. So even without that part happening, Martin added some stuff that allows for static analysis of this, which means without even running the code, $x.test, it knows it's a version item and you get all the version specific parameters. So all of this kind of type inference and typing is really great, especially if you're coming from a strongly typed language background like TypeScript or C#. And one of the benefits of those is that you get a lot of very nice IntelliSense because of the way that they work, because of the work that this guy's been doing, which is fantastic. More and more you're able to do this, and especially if you type your variables, like if you put the type before it, then you can get this IntelliSense like so far down the line. I use it every day, and more if you look at code that I have, especially more increasingly complex. In PowerShell, I tend to type a lot of my variables. A lot of times you don't have to, again, because Martin's really good and he can infer the type pretty often. But the more you add types to your variables, the more you have the ability to get this kind of easy IntelliSense and not have to guess what the property is or have to use get member or any of that kind of stuff. So another thing that was added, this is something that's not directly in VS Code, but one thing that was added is for markdown files. If you have an image, I'm just going to take like a screenshot like this. If you have an image or a movie or anything else like that, you can now just paste it and it will automatically take whatever you do, drop it into an images folder, and automatically create the link for you. So if anybody did Markdown before this was available, like that whole process would usually take me like 2 minutes. Like I would have to take the image, manually put it in the folder, manually write the Markdown, probably misspelled something, waiting for it to show up. I'm just going to do the live preview to the side here just to show that it works. See, there's my screenshot that I did. Really nice, and you'll notice it automatically picked the folder. And if I were to paste another image, I don't know if it works with the same one. See, it just keeps going, so you can just keep adding images. It auto creates them over here. In the settings, it's possible to customize how they get named. So this is sort of the default naming, but if you want a different way of naming the files, you can go into the settings and change them. Really useful feature. Even though that's not specifically PowerShell, we all are good stewards of our information. We like to write documentation. Documentation is written in Markdown, and that's a really, really nice benefit for that to be able to work. So one other thing that we have here, this is a new thing that is brand new. It's been in the Insiders extension for a while. Oops. It's been in the Insiders extension, and I'm just going to make a little more room here. So in the Insiders extension, there's been this feature where if you go to Terminal Suggest as a setting, there's this new setting for Terminal Suggest enabled. So this is pretty interesting, like VS Code's a huge program, it's worked around. Currently, this setting only works with PowerShell because it's the only one that it will work for other shells, but right now this is a quote-unquote PowerShell exclusive feature. If you check this box, and you can do this in the current stable version, what you will get in your terminal, and I'm probably going to have to start a new terminal for this to work. If it doesn't take forever to load, then I didn't do it right. So, okay, there we go. So now when I do like get child item, check it out. I get auto completion in the terminal, not just in the same kind of like how you have in the editor window, like that's in the terminal. There's been a lot of like cool terminals that have kind of experimented with this. And so, but now they actually have it in VS Code. If I do like get child item dash, again, still uses the same completion engine. So this works the same pretty much as the editor does, and all of these completions, work the same way. So you have the ability to get this kind of really cool IntelliSense as you're just interactively writing stuff, which is pretty great. There are a couple caveats with it. It does override your built-in control space. So like if you prefer that usage, it overrides that. So this is still sort of like a in-progress feature. And I've been working with the guy who's writing it to kind of like help tune and tweak and maybe make some of this stuff a little bit nicer. But really, really cool to like, especially if you're like a new user, to be able to just go to your terminal and like, I don't get child item what, and just dash and, oh, okay, I have these options. So really great new feature. So one other thing that was released, I don't believe it was technically this year, but has improved a lot, is the VS Code CLI and VS Code Server. Has anybody here ever used the VS Code Server or the CodeCLI? Yeah, right, Rob's there. Okay, that's good. I'm glad that not many people have seen it because let me ask a different question. Has anybody here used like code spaces, like GitHub code spaces? Okay, a few more. Has anybody ever done like SSH remoting with PowerShell? And okay, great. That's even better. So where you SSH into a box and it's like you have your Visual Studio Code and it looks like it's on your desktop, but you're actually like SSH'd on the other box. So the way that works is that there's a special little if you look in your folder, you probably notice like there's a little like .vs code folder, and it drops a little special server so it can have a client server communication with wherever that server is. So that's really nice if you can SSH to a box and it's on your network, but what if you need to get into something that's somewhere else? So with the CodeCLI command, and I'm probably going to have to restart this. So, oh, good, it's still running. So with the CodeCLI, once you have it, this is Azure Cloud Shell. So Azure Cloud Shell, if you don't know, is actually a little virtual machine that runs, and it runs a special version of Linux that Microsoft maintains called CBL Mariner. Well, it's Linux, so all the rules of Linux apply. So why wouldn't I be able to SSH into this the same way I do VS Code? Well, there's no networking access to Cloud Shell, and Cloud Shell doesn't even have an SSH daemon. But with CodeCLI, what CodeCLI has the ability to do is if you do this CodeCLI tunnel, oh, I'm in the wrong folder. Hang on, I gotta go .share. I had to move it. Oh no, did it bounce my CLI? Local share, excuse me. And this is just where I put this executable, but you can download it anywhere. So there's CodeCLI. So when you run this CodeCLI tunnel, it'll start up the tunnel, and you have this access and all that, and you'll get down here at the bottom a little link. And so what this has just done is it started a version of that version of the server. That's a really lightweight version of the server, and it uses this thing called DevTunnels, which is a new thing in Azure provides that allows you to basically create free port forwardings out. But they're strongly authenticated. Like they're authenticated through OAuth, and it's not just a port out on the internet. Like you have to have the credentials to actually use that port. So that's all happening on the back end. But basically what it's done is it's done that, and it's created this rendezvous point that I can now connect to, and it's given me this link. So if I go to this even that's kind of small, but it just says vscode.dev. If I click this link, I will get a VS Code in my browser that's running in my Cloud Shell. So in addition to just the command line and the editor, I can now have the full experience of VS Code, including the PowerShell extension, etc., inside of Cloud Shell. And it's a little slow because Cloud Shell is not that big of a virtual machine, but here it is. And I can click on my things and do all my things, and all my extensions work. Really cool. So that worked. I use Cloud Shell here as an example. You can use it anywhere. You can have Windows, Linux, wherever. If you have somewhere like, if you ever had like a script that's running on a remote machine and you're trying to troubleshoot it, but you have to RDP to it or something and try to do it in ISE, and you're like, man, I really wish I could use VS Code. You can just simply drop this CodeCLI on there and get into that environment and troubleshoot it. And I'll get to your question in a second. I even have a version of this that I don't have here for the demo, but you can do this in a GitHub action. Like if you have a GitHub action and your script is at a certain point you can fail, I have a thing that if your script fails, it can actually tie into the script, run it, and you can interactively debug your GitHub action inside of GitHub Actions, which is really cool. I'll try to do a community presentation on that later, but this is kind of a tight format, so I won't be able to. Yeah, you had a question? So the question is, have I tried it in Azure DevOps pipelines? Specifically, no, but it should work just fine. Basically, as long as it's a virtual machine and you can run an executable in it and it has at least like port 443 out to the Azure relay ports, this should work. It works on any desktop. I've tried it on like Server 2016 desktops. I've tried it on all kinds of things. Where like there's a remote server I had to do. Okay, I have a bootstrap script, which I'm not going to show here, but it's just like IWR. It's like bit.ly/CodeTunnel, and you just invoke that, and it automatically finds it, downloads it, gets it ready, gets it up, and you can get into that thing and use VS Code inside it, even though it's might not even be attached to your network, might not even be anywhere line of sight. So the question was, can we use it to work around for double hop problems? Kind of, in the sense of, the thing about the double hop problem is that that's using Kerberos, and that's for like PowerShell remoting. This is not really remoting in the sense, this doesn't really use PowerShell remoting in the sense of, it could in the sense you could start your VS Code on that server, and since it's like, it will just be like having a PowerShell window on that server. So from that server to somewhere else, you would be fine. If before you were here and you were remoting to another server and then trying to remote somewhere else, and you were getting double hop as a result of that, now you're just directly on that server. So in a way, you can use it to work around double hop, but it doesn't really like solve it, if that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. So doing good here. So I'm going to, one thing that you may have noticed down at the bottom here is there's this new tab for ports. So the DevTunnel thing that I was talking about is now built into VS Code. So you can use the code tool to get free port forwardings. Has anybody ever used tools like ngrok or that kind of thing, where you have like a local web server and you're trying to forward it out to the internet? It may not be super, it's more of a developer thing, but it's pretty nice. Like if you have like a local thing that you need to work on, I can just add something like, say like you're doing Azure Functions and you're running the local Azure Functions emulator, but you want to test it from some other program, like you want to run and invoke the API. Well, without even having to publish it, you can just like pick up, well, that's not a port number. I typed way too fast. I'm like, I know I'm not that good at networking, but I am aware there's only like 65,000 ports. Anyhow, so like 4526. And what that'll do, just right there, in that time frame that you just saw, effortlessly, it registered with that relay service, gave that port forward, and now I have a forwarded tunnel that I can go to that I'm already OAuth here. Like if you go to this and try to go to it, it'll ask you to log in. And if you don't have credentials that I have authorized, it won't work. So this is not a naked port on the internet. But I go and do that, and now I have, obviously I didn't have port open, but like if this was like Pod or PowerShell Universal or something, I can now just very quickly like put on the internet. Like if I'm collaborating with somebody who's like, hey, go to this URL. As long as they're on the internet, it can provide that rendezvous point without us even being on the same network. Really cool stuff. So definitely check that out if you do that kind of development, or you have a reason that you have a local port to forward out. Now, the fact that you can do this, please check with your company's access and privacy policies. That ideally, if they don't want this, they're up on the news and they have blocked the DevTunnels URL. So this is all like, this is disableable in the sense that all you got to do is block that URL in your company policy. If you're worried about people doing this, first of all, you're already too late because they're doing with ngrok and all kinds of other tools. But if your firewall has some kind of category for like port forwards or proxies, my guess is DevTools is now on this list. If you disable that, then this part doesn't work. So yeah. Just be aware of it as a thing, just because you can do it. Make sure you get the blessing from your company. But as mentioned, this is very different from other tools where it's not just, suddenly there's this naked thing that somebody can get into. You have to have OAuth credentials to get in. Like I'll just demo this real quick and give me just 1 second. If I add that one, I copy that. So if I do like an in private window, you have to sign in. So, this isn't a naked tunnel. Like you have to be authenticated in order to use it. So that's a very important point. Yeah, did you have a question?
Is it the basic plain VS Code, any extension?
It comes built in. Yeah. So yeah, you should see this ports down here. Like if in your VS Code, if you haven't looked lately, like it should just be down there. So yeah, I'm pretty sure it's not, it might be an extension. It just might be one that I pulled in, but as far as I remember, that one does not take an extension. If it is, it's just one of the ones that generally comes built in. So yeah, I always forget, but every time, like when I do my CodeCLI and I don't even have any of my settings pulled down or anything, it's usually there as I recall. So yeah, very cool thing. It's called DevTunnels. There's lots of things about them. You can Google Microsoft DevTunnels and learn all about it. It basically uses the Azure Relay Service, which is really funny because it's really expensive. Like to do Azure Relay Service, it's like $10 an endpoint a month. But for this CodeTunnels thing, I'm sure, I don't know how it got developed, but I'm sure somebody was just like, hey, can we use this Azure Relay thing? It's cool for this DevTunnels thing. And it's like, okay, yeah, how much do you want to charge for it? Oh, we want to make it free. And I'm sure the guys on Relay is like, wait, we have to do this whole infrastructure for this thing we're just going to give away for free? It's like, okay. So I'm sure they figured it out some way. But I do love Azure Relay. It's a great service, but it's also very expensive to use for like private things. But DevTunnels uses that infrastructure. Okay, so that is most of it here before we get to questions and we can go through items. But I do have one more thing I would like to show you. This is something that that has been talked about a lot with the PowerShell extension, and it's something that's kind of tricky to do just due to the nature of how PowerShell is not a statically typed language. But if you go to a particular issue. We are currently trying to work on this, and if I go to my extensions, you should see in my PowerShell extension, I actually have published a temporary VSIX that basically is starting to add this rename support for variables, for functions, for everything. If you have a function here, and it's if you define a function test 2, 3, 4. I'm not sure it's going to work here, but yeah. So see, it can rename that. So this is very early. Yeah. So I think I had the PR up here and I lost it, and I do want to get it up because I want to give credit. This is not my work. This is not Andy's work. This is just a community member who just submitted a PR, and it's a very impressive PR, and I'm currently reviewing it. We're trying to figure out the best way to handle it, but if I go to there it is. Sorry, PowerShell, VS Code PowerShell. It's in the pull requests here. And so for here we go. So Rasmo99, shout out to Rasmo99, who I have no idea who he is, but he's really great. He's the one who authored this, and we've had a lot of discussions about this over the years. Like this is sort of like the VS Code extensions, like #1 issue, like editor Windows was for something else. And the big problem is PowerShell is not a statically typed language, so there's not really a way to do this perfectly. There's not a way to, it's not a strongly typed language. So there's lots of edge cases, which we detail if you read through the issues, where we can't make this perfect. And we definitely like to try to do it across multiple files is just going to be extremely difficult. So we're looking at scoping it that like allowing rename to work just within a single file and having lots of restrictions around what specifically you can do, but we still feel like we can cover probably 80 to 90% of the stuff you want to do with rename. But there'll probably be a warning. The first time you hit F2, it's probably going to pop up a box that says, this is not perfect. Please click this link and understand the caveats and limitations. And you'll have to click I accept, which will drop in a setting that'll never show you that again. But we've decided that probably that's the best way that we can make that work. But there's tons and tons of examples that we're going through all the different edge cases. And if we have time and there's no questions, I'll start going through all the things that we've implemented so far. It's really impressive, the stuff that he's figured out how to do it properly. So hopefully this is coming down the line. I wouldn't expect it for maybe 6 months to a year at the minimum. But I do have, if you go to this pull request, if you come down here, I have built an extension for it. And I will, when I update the presentation, I'll put a link to this in the references. So you can download this now, install it in your VS Code, and play with it. We're not quite ready for feedback yet because we already know tons of issues. And when we get to the point that we have that, it'll start showing up in the insiders as a opt-in item. The preview extension is an opt-in item. And at that point, we're really going to want to gather feedback on like edge cases. This is when you can show off how cool you are with PowerShell. Where you're like, well, look, I set up this thing. There's no way that can be renamed. And it's like, okay, well, if we can figure out a way to do it with AST, which is the way that PowerShell parses and structures things into objects, if we can figure out a way to do that and have it not create like terrible renames that break everything, then we'll try to implement that. Otherwise, we're going to put it on the we're not out of scope list of things. It's because the second we put this in, we just know we're going to get like 50 issues that are like, rename doesn't work doing this and rename doesn't work doing that. So we have to just be very clear. The second you hit F2, you have to understand it's never going to be perfect. And that's just simply because of the nature of PowerShell. Some of the stuff that makes PowerShell so easy to use, unfortunately, makes it so tools like that are extremely difficult to do. But that being said, for 99% of the use cases that you want to do it for, like, you just have a function, I just want to rename that, and it's just in the scope. But just don't expect to be able to have like a code base with like 80 different files and you rename a variable here and it changes it in like 95 different places. If that's all in one file, maybe, but we're not going to have cross-file support, at least initially. So that's the core of my content there. Definitely check that out. And so there's a lot of work also being done on the back end of the VS Code extension. So while there aren't a lot of major new features in the VS Code extension, it's being improved reliably much. There's so many things that have improved in performance and stability, and there's a lot of back-end security stuff that's being done to make sure that the PowerShell extension isn't vulnerable to supply chain attacks, things like the XZ thing, that kind of thing. When XZ happened, if you're not familiar with that, it was somebody changed the library that's used everywhere and potentially compromised lots of projects. So the way that things are built and pretty much across Microsoft are being retooled to kind of mitigate against those kind of things. It's been made kind of a high priority. So once a lot of that work kind of gets done and gets through, then a lot more. You'll probably start seeing a lot more feature work. And this is just, I'm not a Microsoft employee. This is just from discussions we've had. It's what I know so far. So again, thank you very much, and I'll go ahead and open the floor to any questions. And these. Oh, thank you. And again, in the slide deck, I have, while these aren't, as I mentioned, these will be in the slide deck, but some things I recommend. This is where I find out new stuff, is the VS Code updates log, the Visual Studio Code change log is awesome. Like, if you want a lesson in how you should write release notes, go look at the VS Code log. Like, it's bulleted, it has GIF examples, like, it's awesome. The PowerShell for Visual Studio Code has a very good changelog that Andy maintains. So as new things come out, new versions, you can just look at that in the GitHub releases. It's also there in the extension. And the VS Code YouTube channel itself and has shorts, has all kinds of really neat stuff that I'm like, oh, that's cool. There was one demo I was going to do that I didn't really have time to get in here that will probably be in the community, but I was like, oh, that's cool. I'm going to put that in my thing. So definitely recommend their channel. They do a pretty good job with that. And finally, this is a channel called Code 2020. It's done by Matt Bierner, who is one of the VS Code, not necessarily like a direct dev, but sort of, he's a major community contributor. And he does all these great little shorts of like cool things you can do in VS Code. And I've learned a ton from that. So those are things like, if you want to keep learning and be on what's top of news, so that when you come into this presentation, you're like, I already know what that is, then check those out. All right, so I'll open up for questions, and they don't just have to be questions about my presentation. If you have questions about VS Code or how to do anything like that, or anything about my setup, if you have questions about, these funky squigglies I have there, questions about my prompt, it's open floor till where you get kicked out of here. So, any questions? Yeah.
You had comment on your code. If you do something wrong, you have this comment at the end.
Oh, yes. So the question was, when something goes wrong, you'll notice that here I have these comments right at the end. So if you had installed the PowerShell extension pack, you wouldn't ask me that question because it's in there. So you'll notice that these are the exact same as the problems that are down here at the bottom. And again, I'm sorry if that's too small. I hope that helps. So this is an extension called Error Lens. Let me go over here and find it. Error Lens. So this is the extension that does it, and it's a pretty popular extension, and it basically just takes what's in your problems view and puts it right next to your thing. So as you go and you make mistakes and things like that, it's just in real time updating based on what showed down your problems. I love that because it's just right there. Like I don't have to don't get there like, why isn't this working? And I didn't look at my problems view. It's right there letting me know that there's an issue. This works not just for PowerShell, it works for all languages. It's a great tool. It has lots of great tune and tweak settings. So when you install by default, it's a much brighter than this. And so if I go to my settings for Error Lens, it has, as you see, it has 73 different settings. But I go through here and I've changed. It's probably easier to see in the JSON. Error Lens. So yeah. So like I've gone through and I've sort of like customized the colors to be a little less like intense and in your face. Like I still want to see it, but I've kind of like darkened the colors a little bit to match my theme. So that's stuff you can do. So that's what Error Lens is. The Error Lens does that. Check it out. Very cool. Yeah. Uh-huh. So by default, when you do, so the question is, with DevTunnels, is it just your account or can you give access to other people? So by default, it's just you. There is a tool that, I'm trying to remember where it is. I think it's the origin. I don't think it's available in here, but like with the CodeCLI, you do have the ability to like give access to other GitHub accounts. And Azure Relay has support for that in terms of how you define where the access is. But I don't believe, I'm sure there's somebody on the internet screaming at me right now, but I don't believe in the UI here that you can set it up. It might be in the settings. I honestly don't know, but I do know that Relay does have support for that. And one thing that you can do is when you create a tunnel, you do have the option here when you create it. I did it again, didn't I? No, it's actually signing in my, that's my non. It's going to be mad at me. Okay, so you do have an option here, visibility. So you can change the visibility to public. So you can actually make this an unauthenticated tunnel if you want to. So that's typically the way that I've done it, is just like if I have something that I'm going to collaborate with somebody, I know it's just going to be short-lived, just turn it on, have it, turn it back off. But otherwise, I don't know if there's support directly in here to do that, but I do know that Azure Relay has support for that. So it might be a coming feature, I'm not sure. So yeah. Yeah, question. HTTP. So it's HTTPS protocol for the authenticated tunnels because obviously it's got to do the thing. So it only works for things like if you're serving a web browser. It doesn't work for like if you want to serve like a telnet session or an SSH session. But the private ports do because it's not authenticated. The public ports do. If you switch it to public, then you can do it for any kind of protocol because now there's nothing that has to be in the way to get into that port. Any other questions? Yeah.
Very basic question. When I'm in my script and I'm writing some code, what's the easiest way to jump between terminal and back into the code? You know, like hiding the terminal or doing stuff. Is there like a shortcut?
Yeah, you just use this thing. If you're not aware of this, it's called a mouse. Vim users I know are like vampires looking at this thing. I get it, but I actually don't know I do know that like I do believe that there is a so this is a good lesson. I don't know, but if you don't know, it's almost certainly if you go to I'm doing Control Shift P or F1. I forgot to turn on my keyboard. So if you go here, if you go to the preferences, open keyboard shortcuts, everything you can do in VS Code is here. So like I'm just going to start scrolling here. Like there's a lot in here. So I bet if there's something for terminal, if there's not a built-in key, this is usually how you can bind it to a key. Is it control? Does control dot work? I don't know if I'm here. Control. It doesn't work on mine. Doesn't work on my machine. Oh wait, no, it might because I'm doing period because I'm an idiot. Control single quote. Yeah, it's not work. I don't know. I mean, I mess with my settings, so it may not be there. But the short being is that if there's something that you want like that, the first thing you'll want to do is go to keyboard shortcuts and see if you can find it in here. So I'm assuming like one of these terminal ones, like switch terminal. There's probably something in here, and then if there's a key binding for it, you'll find it there. If not, you can make your own. And what's even cooler is you have content. Yeah. Oh.
I'm not sure if I did it right, but I think you have.
I think it's this one. Oh, hang on. Just wait.
Little trick to switch with the same key, because you can have a preference that says if you're in a terminal, then with this key go to the editor, and if not, go to the terminal.
Yeah. So that's what I was just about to mention. So that's one of the really neat things about VS Code is you can make it so keyboard shortcuts only work in certain contexts. It's this when thing. So this control down arrow, where it's like, oh, I want to focus on the terminal, it only works if you're in one of these states. Either you're in accessibility mode, a terminal has been created, that the view is available, and so like you can make shortcuts so you can have shortcuts like when you're in the terminal, certain shortcuts work. When you're in editor window, only certain shortcuts work. When you're in your source control view, only certain shortcuts work. So you can make this as key and detailed like that. So that's my non-answer to your question. I don't know. I don't use this thing because that's what I do. Any other questions? Yes. And go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, that randomly failed. And I think like what happened if I would be able to set up a DevTunnel and be able to troubleshoot it. But how is that different from just logging onto the agent machine and firing up a result?
So the question was that the thing I was talking about with like DevTunnels, more specifically, that would probably be more code server than DevTunnels, although code server uses DevTunnels. Basically, it's like, if you're in a job where I was talking about the example of, you could start it in GitHub Actions and have like a VS Code inside the runner. How is that different from doing it like just running VS Code on the agent runner? The answer is it isn't. Aside from the fact that when you run there, you'll still have all the environment variables because it runs inside the context of your job. So you'll still have all your environment variables and whatever, if that's the thing you're trying to troubleshoot. The other thing, though, is that unlike, you may be using hosted runners, like you're using the ones like from GitHub where they just spin up and turn down, and you're not actually using your own runners. So you're using those ephemeral runners. So in those, it's really useful because once that job is done, that thing is gone. And so you can't just log into the agent. So that's where I found it very useful to do. It's something that I did, and I did as a fun thing. I use kind of personally. Clearly, there's a lot of interest in it. So I'll probably work on that a bit more and put something together to show how to do that. So, another question. Absolutely. Yeah. The way it's like one of the very few uses I've had for like trap is like I have sometimes a thing where you could just have trap at the top. And actually the way that I usually do it is that I mostly do it in GitHub Actions, but in GitHub Actions, like if a job fails, you can rerun it with debug logging. And what I do is I have a thing that when I rerun with debug logging, that does drop a special environment variable. So I just have something that looks for that environment variable. And if it's there, it catches that step. And if there's an error at the catch step, it will jump into VS Code and rerun the script with debugging so that the next time it will hit the breakpoint where, it basically like it would look in the error, see where the error was, find the step behind it, and then rerun it with debugging so that when I open up the VS Code, it's already breakpointed at that debugger stop. It's not perfect, but it's kind of neat, Yeah. I'm going to, one more question and then we'll have to wrap if there's any. All right. Well, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the conference.